Welcome in. Today, we're really going to dig into Agile, like how to work at warp speed on, well, anything really. It doesn't even have to be like a tech project. We've got excerpts from Scrum Master, the Agile training seminar for business performance to guide us.
This book is awesome, by the way. It's packed with advice from real Agile pros, and it's going to help us understand how to, supercharge any project, really.
Totally. What I found super interesting was the book's main idea. Being fast, innovating quickly, that's what gives you the edge, especially these days when everything is changing so fast, right?
Absolutely. The companies that come out on top, they're not just keeping up, they're the ones setting the pace. And here's the thing, this isn't just about Silicon Valley. It's true for every industry out there.
Exactly. The book even uses this really interesting example, comparing a busy convenience store with a peaceful Japanese onsen.
Oh yeah, I loved that analogy. It shows how the need for speed is everywhere, even if what you're trying to achieve is totally different. In a convenience store, it's all about getting people in and out fast, right?
Right.
But in an onsen, speed is about maintaining that calm atmosphere. If someone spills something, you don't want it to disrupt everyone's zen.
Right. It's about being efficient no matter what you're doing. And the book talks about how Tesla, the electric car company, they totally get this.
For sure. They're all about iterating quickly, constantly testing, learning, improving. There's even this quote from Elon Musk in there, where he basically says, speed is everything if you're playing the long game.
And that's what I love about this book. It doesn't just tell you about Agile, it actually shows you how to do it, even with something as basic as building a paper airplane.
Yeah. That whole paper airplane game is genius. It really highlights the power of trying things out, getting feedback, and then iterating. It's amazing how much better those paper airplanes get after just a couple of rounds, even if you've never built one before.
Okay, so we see how important speed and iteration are, but how do we actually put this into practice? The book breaks down this thing called Scrum into what it calls the 3-5-3 structure. You got your 3 roles, 5 events, and 3 artifacts.
And don't let that 3-5-3 thing scare you off. It's simpler than it sounds.
So let's break it down. We've got the developer, the one actually building stuff, the product owner who's the voice of the customer, and then the Scrum Master, making sure everything runs smoothly.
You got it. You can think of the Scrum Master as the protector of the Agile process. Their job is to remove any obstacles and make sure the team has what they need to be awesome.
And it's a major obstacle for a lot of projects. Have you ever been in one of those high-pressure deadline meetings where no one has a clue how long something will take? This is for that.
What's key here is getting the people who are actually doing the work to give their estimates, not just their managers. That's step 1 of the hashtag Joe estimate. And forget trying to predict exact dates, which we're usually terrible at. Instead, you focus on how much effort something will take, how complex it is. The book actually says this is way more accurate.
So it's about taking the emotion out of it, making it more about data, right?
Exactly. And when you do that, you get more accurate predictions and, in the end, a better outcome for the project.
That makes total sense. But how do you take those abstract points for effort and turn them into a real plan with deadlines and everything?
That's where this thing called the release plan comes in. This tool basically connects those effort points to a real timeline. And get this, it uses data from how your team has performed in the past to predict when you'll likely finish future projects. No more guessing.
That's so smart. Okay, we've talked about Scrum, but then the book kicks it up a notch and talks about, get this, extreme manufacturing, or XM.
Right. XM is all about those practices that make even 1-week hardware sprints possible. We're talking continuous everything. Integration, testing, deployment. It's about constant feedback and iteration.
It's pushing the limits of what's possible. And the book has this crazy case study about the SAB Gripen fighter jet.
I know, right? A fighter jet designed and built using Agile. They used 3-week sprints to build those incredibly complicated machines.
It makes you wonder, what else could we achieve if we applied this kind of thinking to other industries, right? And the book hints that even Tesla, with their already crazy fast pace, are moving beyond Scrum.
It really makes you think, what's next for these ultra high-performing teams? So the book actually gives us a sneak peek inside Tesla and this thing they call Joe DX. Imagine Agile, but on a whole other level. It's about cutting out anything unnecessary, speeding everything up, and basically turning everyone into a problem solver.
So it's not even about Scrum anymore. It's about saying, hey, how can we make this even better, even faster? I love that they're aiming for almost 100% of their people being engineers in Joe DX.
Right. Imagine a company where pretty much everyone is building the product. No more getting stuck in meetings or waiting for approvals. Just Real-time budgets, AI doing your purchasing, everything streamlined so teams can just get stuff done.
It's like a dream come true for anyone who's ever felt bogged down by bureaucracy.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it all ties back to that idea of maximizing speed and efficiency. What's really interesting is that the book suggests this Jody X thing. This could be the future for any company that wants to stay ahead of the game, not just tech companies.
So we've talked about Agile and XM, but let's dive into some of the tools this book gives us. One that I really liked was the #Joe estimate. It's supposed to give you the most accurate estimate possible in just 4 steps.
And it's surprisingly easy. The first step is so key, though, and it's the one that really stuck with me. Ask the people actually doing the work for their estimate, not their managers.
It's so obvious when you think about it. They're the ones who really understand how long things take.
Right. And instead of agonizing over specific dates, which we're terrible at predicting, you focus on effort, on how complex something is. And get this, the book says this is way more accurate than estimating time.
Yeah.
340% more accurate.
Wow. So it's about taking the pressure off, having an open conversation based on experience, and not trying to predict the future.
Yeah, exactly. And that leads to more accurate estimations and ultimately better project outcomes.
That totally makes sense. So you have these estimates, these points, but how do you actually turn those into a plan, a roadmap for your project?
That's where the release plan comes in. Think of it like a bridge between those effort points and an actual timeline. And what's really cool is that it looks at how your team has performed in the past to predict when you'll probably finish future projects.
It's like having a crystal ball, but, one that's based on data, not magic.
Right. And because it uses your team's actual performance data, you're much less likely to run into surprises down the road.
That's so valuable. Okay, so things don't always go to plan, right? Projects hit snags, unexpected things pop up. That's where the Scrum Master comes in, right?
Exactly. They're like the project's guardian angel, clearing the way and making sure the team can stay focused and productive. It's not about micromanaging, though. It's about empowering the team to solve their own problems.
It's about giving them the tools and support they need to be awesome. The book really emphasizes that servant leadership approach. So speaking of awesome teams, the book talks about building a culture of collaboration where everyone feels ownership and is always learning.
One of the things they highlight is the importance of cross-functional teams. So bringing together people with different skills, different backgrounds, that's what leads to faster problem solving and fewer dependencies between teams.
It's like assembling a dream team with all the superpowers. And what's really interesting is that this approach can even work in hardware development, which has always been like this very siloed step-by-step process.
Right. That's where XM comes in. The book uses XM to show how teams can design, build, and test hardware in these crazy short sprints. It's all about breaking down those walls between departments and getting everyone working together.
It's like, who says hardware has to be slow and complicated? It's time to shake things up.
Exactly. And again, it all comes down to those core Agile principles: rapid iteration, constant feedback, and empowering your teams.
So we keep talking about sprints, but how long should a sprint even be?
Well, the book says that the sweet spot is usually 1 week. But it also acknowledges that not every team is going to be ready for that right away.
Especially if you're used to more traditional project management methods, that could be a big leap.
Definitely. The most important thing is to figure out what works for your team and the project you're working on. The key is that the sprint needs to be long enough for the team to actually get something done, something they can test and get feedback on. The book calls this an XS project.
Right, because what good is a sprint if you don't actually cross the finish line, right? It's about finding that balance between making progress and feeling like you have enough time to breathe.
Totally.
Yeah.
And to keep things on track within a sprint, there are key events built in. You've got the daily Scrum, which is just a quick check-in where everyone talks about what they're working on, any roadblocks they've hit, and what they're planning to do that day. It's just about keeping that momentum going.
And making sure everyone's on the same page, right? No one's going rogue.
Exactly. And then you've got the sprint review at the end of the sprint. This is where the team gets to show off what they accomplished, gather feedback from stakeholders, and celebrate their wins.
It's like the Agile version of a victory lap. And speaking of celebrating, one thing I really appreciate about this book is how much it emphasizes the human side of Agile.
Yes. It's not just about robots churning out work. It's about creating a culture where people feel valued, motivated, and empowered to do their best.
The book even has this great line, morale multiplies velocity. Love that.
Right. When you have a team that's happy and energized, they just get so much more done and they come up with better ideas.
And that doesn't just happen magically. You have to create that environment. It's about giving people a sense of purpose, trusting them to make decisions, and fostering that constant learning and growth.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of we're in this together.
And the book even suggests that some companies might want to restructure their whole organization around these agile principles.
They even talk about these things called teal organizations. They sound fascinating.
I know, right? These are organizations built on self-management, purpose, and this idea of wholeness. It's really different from those traditional top-down hierarchies we're used to.
It's like Agile isn't just about projects anymore. It's about rethinking how we work all together. And the book actually highlights some companies that are doing this, in the real world, not just talking about it.
Exactly. They're proving it can be done. And speaking of learning and improving, we have to talk about retrospectives. Yes, this is where the team gets to hit the pause button, look back at the sprint, and figure out what went well and what they could do better next time.
And it's important to remember, this isn't about pointing fingers or dwelling on mistakes.
It's about learning and growing together, right?
Exactly. The book offers a bunch of different ways to run a retrospective, depending on what your team needs and what challenges you're facing.
Some are more visual, some are more analytical, but they all have that same goal of continuous improvement.
Right. And the book really encourages you to have fun with it.
Yeah.
There's this one called the Speedboat Retrospective.
I love that one.
Me too. It's so clever. You basically imagine your project is a boat and you're trying to reach your destination, but there are all these anchors holding you back.
And those anchors represent the obstacles the team faced during the sprint. It's such a great visual, and it can really get those creative problem-solving juices flowing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because work should be fun, right? But the real magic of a retrospective happens after the meeting is over. You have to take action on what you discussed.
Otherwise, it's just a complaint session.
Right. You have to turn those insights into concrete changes for the next sprint.
It's about closing that feedback loop and using it to get better and better over time. So we talked about things that can help teams go faster. But what about those things that slow us down, like context switching?
Ugh. Context switching, the ultimate productivity killer. It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle.
Sounds dangerous.
It is, for your productivity at least. It's that constant jumping between different tasks and projects. The book even mentions this thing called Weinberg's table of context switching loss. It basically shows you just how much time and energy we waste when we try to multitask.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the most productive thing you can do is just focus on one thing at a time.
For sure. And the book gives you some really practical tips for how to do that, like actually prioritizing your tasks. Like making a list and sticking to it.
And using visual tools like Kanban boards. I love those.
Me too. They're so helpful for keeping track of everything. So we've talked about Agile for one team. But what happens when you have multiple teams all working on different parts of a big, hairy project? How do you keep everyone in sync?
That's when things can get really complicated. The book talks about these things called meta-scrum and scrum of scrums.
Right. Basically, they're just meetings for coordinating all the different Scrum teams. Think of it like creating a network of Agile teams, where everyone is working independently, but still connected to the bigger picture.
So it's like having different departments in a company. They all have their own responsibilities, but they still need to communicate and work together to achieve the company's overall goals.
Exactly. And to do that effectively, everyone needs to be on the same page and have access to the same information. That's where transparency is super important.
And the book talks about breaking down that big, hairy project into smaller, independent modules. That way, each team can focus on their specific piece without stepping on each other's toes.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that the book gives us examples from companies like Bosch, SAB, and even Tesla to show us how they've used Agile to tackle those massive, complex projects.
It just goes to show that Agile isn't just for software companies. It's a framework that can work for anyone, anywhere, as long as you understand the principles behind it.
Absolutely. But let's be real. One of the biggest hurdles to overcome with Agile is getting everyone on board with this new way of doing things.
Yeah, organizational change can be tough. It's not always easy to convince people to let go of the old ways and embrace something new.
Totally. And the book acknowledges that. It stresses how important it is to have the leaders of the organization fully on board from the very beginning.
It's like, if the leaders aren't bought in, why should anyone else be?
Right. The book even suggests that leaders should actually embed themselves within those Agile teams to see how it works firsthand.
I love that idea. It's one thing to read about Agile or hear about it in a meeting. It's a whole other thing to actually experience it for yourself.
Exactly. It's about leading by example and showing your team that you believe in this new way of working. And when you have that kind of leadership support, it makes it so much easier for everyone else to embrace the change.
It's about creating a culture where everyone feels safe to experiment, to take risks, to learn from their mistakes. And when you have that, amazing things can happen. So we're talking about this new way of working, but how do we actually make it happen? Like, where do we even start?
That's where the book really shines. It gives you the actual tools and techniques to put Agile into practice. One thing that really clicked for me was this idea of the I invest criteria for user stories.
Okay, I have to admit, when I first saw invest, I thought we were talking about like stocks and bonds or something, but it's actually an acronym, right?
Yeah, got it. It stands for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. It's basically a checklist to make sure your team is always working on the right stuff in the right way.
So no more of those giant, overwhelming tasks that can totally derail a project.
Exactly. Break it down. Make it manageable. The book even goes into detail about how to run those core Scrum events, like sprint planning, daily scrums, and sprint reviews. It even has, like, sample scripts and agendas you can use with your own team.
It's like having a cheat sheet for Agile. And speaking of learning, one thing I really dig about Agile is this focus on continuous improvement.
It's not about being perfect right out of the gate. It's about that growth mindset, you know?
Yeah.
You try things, you learn, you get better.
You got to adapt the framework to your own situation, right?
Yeah.
Your team, your project, it's all unique.
Exactly. What works for one team might not work for another. And that's totally fine. The important thing is to be flexible.
Okay, but let's talk about the thing that probably keeps a lot of companies up at night, that resistance to change.
Oh yeah, that's real. People like their routines, even if those routines aren't really working.
It's like that saying, better the devil you know. So how do you convince people to give Agile a shot?
Well, the book says starting small can be a good strategy. Maybe try a pilot project with one team. It's a low-risk way to show people how Agile works, get some wins under your belt.
Yeah, proof is in the pudding.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the power of communication. Be open with people about what you're doing and why. And when things go well, shout it from the rooftops.
Success is contagious. So the book is full of these amazing stories about companies that have seen like insane improvements since adopting Agile.
It's true. We're talking about cutting lead times in half, boosting productivity, delivering things faster than ever.
It's like the opposite of those too good to be true infomercials. Was there a particular story that really stood out to you?
Yeah, there was this one software company that was able to cut their development time in half after they started using Scrum. They were able to get new features out to their customers so much faster. It was a complete game changer.
See? It's not just hype, it actually works. And what I really appreciate about this book is that it never forgets that at the end of the day, it's all about people.
Totally. Agile isn't about turning everyone into robots. It's about creating an environment where people feel valued and excited to come to work.
Because when people feel good, they do good work. It's that simple.
Right. And the book gives you some practical ways to create that kind of environment, like encouraging open communication, celebrating wins, and always be learning new things.
It's about creating a culture where people feel supported and empowered to do their best work.
Exactly. Because we all do better when we feel good about what we're doing.
So true. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Agile, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Agile is more than just a set of rules or a trendy buzzword. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about work. It's about being adaptable, collaborative, and laser-focused on delivering value to the customer.
And while it might seem a little intimidating at first, the potential rewards are huge. We're talking about increased speed, happier teams, and happier customers.
This book is your guidebook to making it happen. It's full of practical tips, real-world examples, and even a little bit of humor to keep you going.
Whether you're just starting your Agile journey or you're a seasoned pro, there's something in this book for everyone. If you're ready to shake things up and build something amazing, I highly recommend checking out Scrum Master, the Agile training seminar for business performance.
You might just discover a whole new way of working, and you might even have some fun along the way.
And who knows, you might just inspire the next Agile revolution. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We'll see you next time.